Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but is probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Good day, everybody. This is Susan Elliott, host of the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. And on today's podcast, I'm going to address something that keeps coming up over and over again. And you might have been somebody who has sent the show some letters. And if you are not quite satisfied with this as a catch-all answer to what you sent to me, let me know. I had a few of these letters where people are so busy beating themselves up for what they didn't know, for missing the signs, or for staying in a situation much longer than they should have. And so one of the things that I want to talk about today is how we get into these mind frames and how other people, especially people with personality disorders, and not even if they don't meet all the criteria of the DSM personality disorder diagnosis, because as a psychiatric clinician, I would be very reluctant to give somebody a personality disorder diagnosis if they had not had one previously, and I would never give it to a teenager. As I've talked about in other podcasts, I just didn't do teenage personality disorders. As I've talked about in other places, there's the theory of the identified patient, and many times a functional teenager who's trying to be functional, will be brought up to the emergency room because he or she is responding to a very dysfunctional home life. And the parents will most likely bring the teenager to the emergency room and say, fix this child. And then we find out it's not the child, it's the parents. And because I was the identified patient, or IP as I've written about and talked about a lot, I would always hesitate to saddle any teenager with a really serious diagnosis, but especially if I was getting the IP vibe, like this person is the IP in the family, because running away from an alcoholic, abusive, crazy, dysfunctional family is actually a sane response to an insane situation. But the parents see that the child is acting out and they would haul him or her up to the emergency room, where it's my job to do something about them. I was almost punched out on 2 different occasions by mothers who were hysterical that I wasn't institutionalizing their IP child. So one of the things that I want to talk about is, even if a person does not have a personality disorder diagnosis, because they're kind of hard to come by, and most of the time, anyone who's a narcissist or a sociopath, they're not going to show up in the therapeutic milieu. They're just not going to show up there. It's always the people they drive crazy that shows up there, because according to them, nothing is wrong with them. But many times we get into a relationship with these guys, and I'm going to talk about some of these in some of the Watts case podcasts that I've recorded on Chris Watts being a sociopath and having the narcissistic mistress, and the wife, Shanann Watts, is trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. One of the things that I want to talk about is how we miss the signs. And usually it's something that happens over the course of a few years, but you can always look back on and go, that's where I went wrong. That's where I went wrong. But I've been getting a lot of letters from people who are calling themselves, I'm so stupid, I feel so dumb, from other therapists, from people that work in the mental health industry, even if they're not a therapist, or people that have had mental health issues running their family. And I get these emails, and they're saying, I should have known better, I should have done this, I should have done that. And trying to be on top of this, especially when it's a personality disorder, and again, if it's not that severe, very severely dysfunctional behavior. And what do you do with that? And how it happens over time. one of the stories that I was sharing with somebody that I just thought about this recently in my own life, my oldest son was born and I was 19. I had not babysat for an infant before, not even babysat for one, let alone had complete responsibility for one. And I was nervous, I was nervous. And one of the things that I talk about in the grief work is that grief makes you very disorganized, very confused, and accident prone. When I was writing my graduate thesis on the psychology of the adopted child, one of the things that I noted that was certainly true about me as a child and that I found was a thread that ran along a lot of adoptees' lives, adoptees who knew they were adopted and wondered about their birth family, and there was a whole grief around losing that biological identity that almost nobody gives us any kind of help with or credit for. But adopted children have a higher incidence of being clumsy and accident prone more than other children. And this was just sort of an anecdotal thing that came out of my research when I was writing my thesis. But I was a clumsy kid, but I had good balance. I could ride motorcycles and skateboard. I just always had really good balance. But at the same time, I was completely accident prone. Like I could wave my hand and a gallon of milk would go all over the floor. I had this image of myself, as my brother would say, I was an accident waiting to happen. So now I have this little child. Now he was born at 6'14", and they lose some weight in the hospital, so he's about 6.5 pounds. I've never had a baby this small, like in my arms in my life, and now I'm home with him. So I'm carefully, and I have a history of dropping things and being clumsy, and I'm just a nervous wreck. So I'm trying to give him his first bath, and I'm gingerly making my way over to the sink. And either my mother or my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, grabbed the kid from me and said, you're going to drop that kid. You're so nervous. He's going to start crying. If I was burping him and they didn't think I was patting him hard enough, or I was patting him too hard or whatever, they would take him from me and, oh, he's not going to burp like that. It just seemed like whenever they would put their hands on him to burp him, to feed him, to whatever, the thing that he wasn't doing for me, he's now doing for them. So it kept reinforcing to me that I had no idea what I was doing. And I felt really bad about it, felt horrible. People expect so much from them that they just don't even know how to be a mother, like you spring into the world knowing how to be a mother. So all I wanted to do with my child was not hurt him and make sure that he was living and breathing and eating on a daily basis. So I was a nervous wreck, and they would grab him from me, and then they would make little snide remarks and things like that. Now, at the end of my marriage, 10 years later, he was vocalizing, "You're a bad mother." But at that time, it was just a series of disapproving stares and them grabbing him from me and things like that. But as he got to be a little older of a baby, and then as a toddler, he was a great kid. He was a good baby. He really didn't have a lot of cranky nights or anything. He was a delightful toddler. And I remember when he was about 2 or 3 years old, I had him in the tub one summer afternoon. He'd been out playing. He was dirty. He loved his bath. Loved his bath. He had a bath every single night. And we had all these, they had busy boxes, which you put on the side of the cribs. But we had busy baths that went on the little activity centers that went on the tub, and things would squirt water and things like that. They were so much fun, and we had a whole bunch of them for him. We had the busy boxes for the crib and the busy bath stuff for the bath. Couldn't even find the kid in the tub. Just had so many toys, and he just loved this bath every night, and it was a lot of fun. I'm giving him his bath, and we took turns with that, although my ex did more of the bathing than I did. I think he was more into the busy boxes than I was. Giving my son a bath one night, he's like 2.5, 3, and I'm thinking, I really want to have another one. He was so delightful, so much fun. And I just couldn't think of any reason to not have it. Plus, I'm thinking I can prove that I'm a good mom. So it took me a while, but I was able to convince my ex that he should have a baby. And I carried my first one through the summer, and I didn't want to do that again because I was miserable. So we were trying to plan it out. I really wanted to have the baby in April. So we started planning it, trying to plan it. And what happened was we didn't quite get it. And so my due date was the end of June, like June 20th. And for me, I thought this is good. It's better than the hot weather. Like we'll be over the hot weather and all will be fine. But in my head, I'm thinking, and then I get to come home and be super mom. If they want to try to take the baby from me when I'm bathing him, it'd be like, no, like I've got him and I'll be holding on to him securely. I won't be like holding him like I'm a nervous wreck. So I had all this planned out in my head. So I was working as a retail store manager. I had a convenience store, Cumberland Farms. We were living in Rhode Island. I was working in Massachusetts. I was running Cumberland Farms. And they had given me this store that was just the pit of all Cumberland Farms in the world. And I think they gave me this store to try to get rid of me because I was 23 and not that, I was 23. And I think that they thought that I couldn't handle the managing the store. So they gave me the store where thugs hung out. I mean, real juvenile delinquents that had all graduated high school and now they're just thugs. I was told that they would walk out of the store with merchandise and just be like opening bags of potato chips and eating it on the way out the door without ever paying for it. And these things went on and on and on. And if the store manager would report them to the police, the store manager would come out and they would have their tires slashed and all kinds of things would go on. So they give me the store. Well, I tell my husband about it. And he says, I'm going to take care of this. So he was a maintenance guy during the day, and he would come on Tuesday nights because I would get a big grocery delivery, all of the groceries and everything that went on the store shelves. So I was going to put him on my payroll, and he was going to work on Tuesday nights, and then occasionally when I needed him to fill in, and he was going to read the thugs the riot act. Now, he was a tough Brooklyn Italian, and he thought these guys in this Massachusetts town are just no challenge for him. He's going to go there, he's going to kick ass and take names, and that's all there is going to be to it. And that's exactly what he did. He went in there, and he told them, I'm from Brooklyn, she's from the Bronx. Don't make us lock the door and keep you in here. And that's what we're going to do if you try to get out without paying for something. Like, we're going to take matters into our own hands. And he not only all of the stealing to stop and all the harassment to stop, but now the guys are in the store helping me with things. And he would say, I want you to come in, I want you to check on my wife. If she needs a box lifted, I want you to lift it for her. And they would come in and do that. I mean, it was like crazy. So, of course, Cumberland Farms is just thrilled with me over the way I turned the store around. I mean, we went basically like zero inventory loss, and my store had once been audited like once a week. And now it's being audited a few months because they like the way things are going. So I'm working at that job and I want to have the second baby and I get pregnant. So I decide that I'm going to go out. And at that time, there was no FMLA. I got 3 months maternity leave. That's what I got, 3 months. And because I really thought that they had wanted to get rid of me by giving me that little store that with all the theft problems, I felt like if I overstepped my bounds with maternity leave, I was going to be in trouble. But actually, while I was gone, they decided to give me a big store, a big shiny new store, because I had kind of proven what I could do in the old store. And my husband, now he's my husband, is on the payroll and everything is fine. He's not going to take any guff from anybody. He's going to help me with the store, and we're going to get extra money when he works on grocery nights and stuff like that. So everything seems to be going well. There had not been any violence in my relationship at that point. We decided to move up to Rhode Island when my crazy ex-boyfriend, homicidal maniac boyfriend, got out of jail and came over to our house in Danbury, Connecticut, and was stalking me. And I figured somebody's going to die, either him or either the ex-boyfriend or the current boyfriend is going to die. They had gone at it once before, a long time before this, and I really didn't want this to happen. So we moved to Rhode Island, and everything seemed to be going okay. And any of the tisk, any of the insults early on about my mothering, like that really didn't come up, and see those times as a relatively good time in our relationship. So I'm going out in June, and June 20th comes and goes, no baby. June 25th comes and goes, no baby. June 30th comes and goes, no baby. So I go to my OBGYN. I'm getting big as a house. The really hot weather's starting to come in. I'm flipping out. I'm having the baby at Women and Infants Hospital in Providence, and it was the old one, and there was no air conditioning. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're going into the hot weather. Like, this is horrible. So finally, I was having contractions on July 8th, and I went to the hospital, and they hooked me up, and the ex is fluttering around like he's actually acting like a father should act. And this was going to be one of the last times I ever see him do this. Now, my oldest son had an asthma attack when he was 2 months old, and I brought him to the doctor and we got him situated. And then when he was 3, I went to pick him up from the babysitter one night, and my babysitter she was an older woman who had all these little boys. My son loved going there. She had been babysitting for like 50 years or something, and she had these kids totally under control. And they had a good time being together, and it was fabulous. So I get there, and he's having an asthma attack, and she says to me, take him home and put Vicks on his chest. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. So I call his father, who's working from her house, because there's no cell phones, and I tell him what's going on and what she said, and he says to me, yeah, do that. Take him home and put Vicks on his chest and put him to bed. We get in the car now. There's no car seats. I buckle him into the passenger seat on the front, which is probably safer because I had a Pinto at the time, and they were known for their gas tanks blowing up if they got hit in the back. So he was actually probably safest in the front passenger seat. So there he is. He's sitting in the front passenger seat, and there was no restriction on kids doing that at the time. So we get into the car, and he's sniffling, and he goes, Mommy, I can't breathe. And that was it for me. I ignored what the babysitter said. I ignored what the husband said. I took him to the hospital. We get to the hospital, and the pediatrician on call says he needs a tracheotomy. We need to go in there. And they were not equipped at this small hospital to do a tracheotomy. So I call my husband, and I tell him we're going to the big hospital. They're just doing some things, and then we're going to transport him in the ambulance. So I tell him to meet me at the second hospital, and what he does is he shows up, and he jumps in the ambulance. And the doctor's looking at him, and this is the first time we met this doctor because of everything that went on that night. We kept this doctor as our pediatrician because he was so good with my son. And my son collected trucks, and he loved trucks, and he called ambulances doctor's cars, and he would say, doctor's cars, doctor's cars. So there he is in the ambulance, sitting up like he's king for the day. He's so excited he's in the doctor's car. And he's like, I'm in the doctor's car, like he's just beside himself. And I'm sitting next to him holding his hands, and all of a sudden his father jumps into the ambulance, and he goes, okay, I'm here now, like you follow us to the hospital. And the doctor looked at him like he was out of his mind. And I looked at him like he was out of his mind. I'm thinking, you're going to make me follow you to the other hospital? And he's like, oh, I was so nervous and I just drove all this time. So he just did this big song and dance about how he needed to go in the ambulance because he was just too nervous. Like I wasn't. The doctor couldn't believe it. I mean, the doctor's looking at him like, really? You're making the child's mother get out of the ambulance? Just flew over his head. I got in the car. I drove. I cried the whole way. I drove to Providence. We went to Rhode Island Hospital, and we got him all squared away. He didn't have to have a tracheotomy. They got him situated with his breathing. But I felt that night that I did the right thing, even though two very experienced, quote-unquote, people told me to take him home and put Vicks on his chest to put him to bed, and the doctor said that would have killed him. He would not have been breathing. So I took him to the hospital and saved his life. No compliment for that, nothing. No acknowledgement for that, nothing. Just completely danced over what I had done. And I think my head was starting to see some stuff, but even something as egregious as him jumping in the ambulance and giving me no consideration as the person who's been dealing with the situation the whole night didn't really give me pause to think, because I didn't know what to do with that. So anyway, even though I thought that things like that were really good indicators that I was a good mom, I wanted to hear it as a mother of an infant, of a newborn. So I'm in the hospital July 8th. I stay the whole day. It's so hot, and I'm watching. We're in this big labor room because they didn't have labor suites like they do now. So I'm in this big labor room with all these women, and they keep changing. Like every few hours, it's different women, and I'm the one who's stuck there, not progressing at all. So they tell me to go home and come back because it's hot in the hospital and I wanted to sleep in my own bed with the air conditioner. Go home, come back the next day. Basically, the exact same thing goes on. And I'm so uncomfortable now. My water hasn't broken, so they're not inducing me. I'm so uncomfortable. So they tell me to come back on the 10th of July. And I've been in labor for like 2 days at this point. And I'm like, oh my God. So finally, I mean, it was just a difficult labor and delivery. Very, very difficult. He was coming down face up and he wouldn't turn. They were turning me manually. My husband and the nurse, they're like pushing me back and forth. They're rolling me from side to side. Felt like a doll, not a very well cared for doll table where they're just like, it's hot and I'm sweating. And I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. So my son is born at 6 o'clock at night on the 10th. And he comes out screaming at the top of his lungs and basically did not stop screaming for years. And I bring him home and he does nothing but cry. He's the exact opposite of my first son in every way, shape, or form. Other than the fact that he's a boy, everything else is completely different than my first son. He won't sleep. He won't stop crying. He won't let anybody hold him except for me. I had a picture of him at one point where in his first birthday party, we were all gathered around the high chair to take a picture with him, and he's grabbing onto me like for dear life, like get all these people away from me. And he's a year old at that point. He never wanted to go to anyone but me. So he was attached to my hip 24 hours a day. I would put him in his little baby seat to take a shower, and that was it. I was sleep deprived, it was hot, and I was just in this terrible postpartum depression, and I'm physically exhausted. And because the labor and delivery was so difficult, I'm also trying to heal physically, and I know that I have to go back to work in 2 months. Now, this kid will not sleep through the night and will not sleep through the night until he's a year old. He wouldn't sleep longer than 4 hours until he was 10 months old. It was the first time he slept longer than 4 hours at a clip. But in the early days, when he first came home from the hospital, he slept 10, 15 minutes at a time, a few times during the day. I was absolutely exhausted. And when he slept, I slept. And he slept on me, and if I moved like a little bit of an inch, he was awake. So I wouldn't move at all. So even that sleep wasn't very comfortable. So there I am wondering like how the hell I'm going to do this and go back to work in 2 months if he doesn't stop crying. But I'm doing everything for him. He needs a bath. I give him the bath. I feed him. He needs suppositories because he's colicky. His stomach is just a rock. And I'm doing everything for this kid. I'm changing him like 100 times a day. I'm walking the floors with him. I'm feeding him. I'm doing everything that I can possibly do. And I'm waiting for the cookie. I'm waiting for the approval of, hey, you're a good mom. But I, foolish person, after about 2 weeks, I go to him and I say, do you think I'm a good mom? And this was so important to me. I had been thinking about asking this question since I was trying to get pregnant. Like this whole thing is about, I want the cookie. I want you're a good mom. And I had done everything in my power for this kid and didn't let anybody else do anything for him in an effort to prove that I knew exactly what I was doing. So I wait, the baby's quiet for some reason. I put him in his little seat, and my ex is going to bed. It's about 11 o'clock, so he's going to bed. And I go in to talk to him just for a couple of minutes, and I say to him, do you think I'm a good mom? And he says, too good. And I was stunned. I was floored. I was so disappointed. And I thought, oh my God, if I was not a good mom, to get to be too good mom, I had to have passed good mom at some point. Like at some point in the last 2 weeks, I must have hit good mom territory and flew right past it and went into too good a mom. I can't begin to tell you how disappointed I was that day and didn't know what to do with that information. Because being a good mom was so important to me. And now I'm being told I'm too good a mom. Because the kid is attached to me 24 hours a day, which meant he's not getting any attention. But I was like physically a mess. I mean, it's not like there was going to be any lovemaking or anything going on. I mean, I was basically a walking zombie. And I don't know what he thought he was going to ever get in that state. But 6 years later, when the gaslighting had gotten to be just so obvious, you could not miss the gaslighting. I could look back on that day and know, like, this is where the tide turned. Like, this is where it turned. One of the things that I've been very perturbed to read as I've gone through domestic violence literature and domestic violence research and looking at things like the murder of Shanann Watts, and I read that the number one cause of death among pregnant women is car accidents. And the second most common reason for the death of a pregnant woman is homicide. Homicide, usually at the hands of a loved one. So something happens in some relationships when pregnancy happens and the person isn't really on board with it. Like my husband acted like he was on board with it, but at first, when I first proposed the idea of having a second child, he wanted to know what was wrong with the one we had. And there was nothing wrong with the one we had. In fact, I liked the one we had so much, I wanted to have another one just like him. And unfortunately, I didn't get that. So now I've got this, you're too good mom. And the child that I wanted in order to prove to the world that I was a good mom is the child from hell. So I'm like, well, what do I do with him now? I can't pitch him out the window, although I want to. I told him when he was growing up about screaming 23 hours a day, and I was the only one who took care of him. He didn't want anybody else to touch him, and if anybody else did, he just screamed and screamed and screamed. Nobody wants to touch a screaming baby. So what happens at this point, we had invited up all these people from Brooklyn to come to the christening. And this was going to be a big deal because I hadn't seen a lot of these people since I was a teenager. He had had a couple of funerals in Brooklyn we had gone down for. So I knew his family as a teenager, and a lot of the cousins and stuff I hadn't seen and since we were teenagers and hanging out, going swimming, going dirt bike riding, doing all these things that we did my boyfriend's parents' place in Putnam County, New York, and they would come up from Brooklyn in the summertime, and we would do all these things. So a lot of these people I hadn't seen. I'm really excited. They're coming for the christening. This is going to be great. So the christening's about a month after he's born. So it's about 2 weeks from the time where he says, "Too good, Mom." And from that day until the day of the christening, he slowly stopped speaking to me. We didn't have an argument. We didn't have a fight. I didn't do anything wrong. And he's just not speaking to me. And I don't know why. So the day before the christening, we're downstairs. We always kept the house spick and span. It didn't matter that I'm completely sleep deprived. I can't even spell my own name if I had to, but he wants me to keep the place in tip-top condition. So everything was in tip-top condition. I'd taken the baby and I had put him in the swing, the baby swing, which at the time, they're made out of plastic now, but at the time they were made out of metal. And my oldest son did very well in the baby swing. The other one did not. It didn't matter. He would just cry and cry and cry, and now the baby swing would make this creaking noise. She got screaming baby, creaking noise, screaming baby, creaking noise, it'll drive you just bananas. So I didn't put him in it that much, but I really wanted to pitch in and help with the cleaning while we're getting ready for the christening, because we have like 50 people coming to this christening, and it's a big deal. We have cooking to do, we have cleaning to do, we have all kinds of things to do. So I put the baby in the swing, and we are downstairs, we're cleaning up. I'm helping my oldest son with his room, and we're doing all kinds of things, and the kid's screaming and screaming and screaming. So his father says, "Would you take this kid? Would you do something with this kid? Do something with this kid. Get this kid out of here." And I'm like, okay. I pick him up out of the baby swing. I put him on my shoulder. I turn to leave, and my ex goes to pull the baby swing. He says, as he's pulling the baby swing up, he says, "You can't even put this away?" And so now he wants me to put the swing away while I'm holding the baby, who's 4 weeks old and screaming into my ear. So he picks it up and he throws it, and it lands right in the middle of his fish tank. Right, smashed right through. And I had given him this fish tank. He'd always had fish when we were teenagers. So like the first Christmas we were ever together as a couple, I'd given him this whole fish tank setup. I still have pictures of him setting it up on Christmas Day. And we had gotten into these fish called African chitlets. They were very colorful. They were really nice. And we had a really good run with the African chitlets. Well, now we've got African chitlets all over the floor. There's water, there's fish, there's people screaming, all kinds of things are going on. That disaster's also my fault, because now our brand new rug is soaking wet, our fish are dead, the fish tank is a mess all over the place. And the christening is like the next day. So we get that mess cleaned up, and everybody comes up, and right in front of everybody, the whole kit and caboodle, he would not speak to me, would not say one nice thing to me. He would be on the deck or something, summertime, we're outside, we have a pretty nice yard, people are outside, they're playing badminton and softball. You'd think that we had an amusement park going here. And every time I would walk up to him, he would walk away from me, very deliberately, very consciously showing everybody that he was not speaking to me. It was so uncomfortable. It was so horrible. And I'll go into the rest of the story at some other point, but I went back to work a month after this because I only got 3 months. So I go back to work completely exhausted because he's not getting up with the baby and the baby's not sleeping. So I'm working 10 hours a day on my feet, and you couldn't sit down and rest. First of all, we didn't have any chairs. Like, we would take milk crate and sit down to eat lunch. But if the supervisor pulled up and you were sitting down, you were in trouble. I mean, we were not allowed to be sitting down in the store. So 10 hours a day on my feet with an infant who doesn't sleep. And I remember the first time I came home on a Friday night, working 50 hours a week, just absolutely exhausted, getting the kids from the babysitter, doing this, doing that. And that Friday, I got my period and I came home. I had nothing. I was absolutely spent. And I went home and I fell asleep on the couch. And he comes in, he starts screaming at me. These kids need baths. And I'm like, it's Friday night. I could give them a bath in the morning. But no, he was just being impossible. But he started speaking to me again the day I went back to work. And this was going to be a pattern of his. Whenever he had me in a vulnerable position, he did it when I was pregnant with my third, which I'll talk about in another podcast. You can watch the video on YouTube. My story is about him and everything that he did during my third pregnancy. He did it to me when I was pregnant, and he did it to me when I was in school. Anytime, and then he started doing it to me when we finally separated for the last time. I was out of work. So anytime I was vulnerable, he would go in for the kill. And to this day, thinking about too good, that statement, you're too good a mom, and how I racked my brain over where I went wrong. How could I have missed where good mom was? And there wasn't a good mom, and I didn't figure this out for 6 more years. That there was never going to be approval as long as I lived. And there was no way for me to know that. No way at all. Because when we get involved with people like this, and many times that I've told the story about my ex, we had so much in common. But when we go into relationships with people that are disordered, they will say to us, oh, I'm just like you. Oh, yeah, I have compassion for people. Oh, yeah, I'm real giving and loving. Now, we think about ourselves when somebody says that to us. And narcissists and sociopaths are excellent at this. They will set you up to believing that they are just like you. And so you'll give them some idea of who you are as a person, and you know what that means. So if you say, I like people who are generous, the narcissist, the sociopath, or the severely dysfunctional will say, me too. I'm very generous, and I like people who are generous. And you're thinking, okay, if they're identifying with me as a generous person, I know what I look like when I'm generous, so that must be what they are like. And therefore, we set up our image of them in accordance to who we are. And I talk about this all the time in Frame of Reference. We hear somebody say, I'm honest. And we think about our honesty, and we'll say, oh, yeah, I'm honest, too. And we think about how we walk, how we talk, how we treat other people in deference to that honesty. And we just assume that this person means the exact same thing because that's what we know. So if somebody says, oh, I'm really loving and caring, we go, oh, me too. And we know what loving and caring means. We know that love is an action. We know that when we care about somebody, we go out of our way to do something for them. So we're saying to ourselves, essentially, if this person says, I'm just like you, they are just like me. And we use all the stuff that's good about us to create an image about them that is completely and utterly false. They're nothing like that. They're nothing like us. They don't operate under the same set of rules, under the same set of guidelines. And they're full of crap. They're not generous. They're not loving. They're not caring. They don't do things for other people. They are not the same as we are when we describe ourselves using some of those adjectives. So in adult relationships, I know that my ex and I did have a lot of stuff in common. I've talked about the music. I've talked about rock climbing and swimming and motorcycle riding, like all these things we did together. We truly enjoyed doing together. But all these things about me that I projected onto him were really just about me, not about him. And how he changed was becoming who he was as an adult. Because he was very good to me when we were boyfriend-girlfriend. He did buy me things. He did look after me. He did do all that caring stuff. That love bombing wasn't sincere. I mean, at what point did he turn into a narcissistic asshole? Somewhere between give me the baby, you don't know what you're doing with my first one, and you're too good a mom with my second one, the shift happened. And he would tell me when the baby would cry and cry and cry, he would say, I told you I didn't want to have a second one. I told you that there was nothing wrong with the one we already had. I don't know why you had to do this to us. You know, the baby that just screamed 24 hours a day. I did this to us. So when I was reading some of the statistics on pregnant women and I was thinking about the Shanann Watts case, I was thinking about my own pregnancies and how after the first one, he was just a miserable bastard to me during those pregnancies, just miserable. So it has nothing to do with us being dumb. It has nothing to do with us being non-observant. It has to do with us seeing people within our frame of reference and believing when someone says, I'm a good person, and we think we're a good person, and we apply the things about us that make us a good person to them, because that's how we think of it. We cannot imagine this person doesn't care. This person isn't going to give me approval in a million years. I really thought that I would have gotten the you're a good mom cookie at some point. I never ever did. It was just always criticism, always, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't figure it out because until the last year of my marriage, I honestly thought there was a way to get that approval, to get that cookie, and there wasn't, and I didn't know it. If you don't know that you don't know, there's nothing you can do. And I've talked to people who are therapists, who are in the helping professions, who do pastoral counseling, who do this, who do that, who do outreach, community outreach, who do volunteer work on a suicide hotline, a DV hotline. And they'll say, I was working in this capacity and I was ignoring what was going on in my own life. Yeah, that's what we do, because in our own life, we still think this person is who we are. Good, loving, giving. And we're going to eventually figure out the magic key to unlocking that. And then we can have the relationship that we want, where we get approval and love for the things that we do right. And we don't get slammed and lambasted for the littlest things that we do. But that's not what happens. And we don't see where we've gone wrong, and we will berate ourselves and beat ourselves up for not knowing what we cannot know and what we've been set up to not know. It was a long time between when I thought I want to prove to this man that I'm a good mom and him saying, you're too good a mom. And for me to ever understand why he would not speak to me at that christening, I hadn't done anything except pay attention to the baby. Like, that was my big sin. And in my low self-esteem and in my I can't do anything right mode, which my family had me in, I was ripe for the picking. It was ripe for the picking that I would spend the next 6 years chasing his approval. And he would cheat, and he became abusive, and he became physically abusive, and he became verbally abusive, and he started cheating, and he started doing all these things, and each one was my fault according to him. But I was being groomed. I was being set up for it. And that day, he said, too good a mom, was the first day of it all going to hell. And there was no way for me to know that. There was no way for me to understand that. There was no way to get his approval. He wasn't going to give it to me for all the money in the world. Never, ever, ever. So if you're having these issues, if you're shooting on yourself, I should have known, I'm so stupid, stop. Just stop. You take the bat out of your hand and stop beating yourself in the head with it. It's no good. You don't need to do this. So don't do it. There's many reasons why we don't get it until we get it. So I want you to start being nice to you about this whole thing and forget about, I miss this, I miss that, I'm so stupid, Forget it. Just thank God you know it now, and thank God that there's things you can do about it. So this is Susan Elliott signing off. Please remember to rate and review the podcast. This is very important. Share it with your friends, share it with your neighbors, share it with whomever, and we'll keep going. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.